Horizon Chance, Omsuji Rex, and this is the last-ditch attempt to save the USSR against August coup of 1991 by the channel History Matters. Yeah. Now, first of all, before somebody called me, some imbecile calls me a commie or whatever, I'm reacting to a lot of USSR Russian videos from this channel because those are the famous videos on this channel. I'm going through which are the popular videos on this channel first type of approach, right? So yeah, that's why. August coup of 1991, never heard of this, right? Or maybe I have but forgotten, I don't know. But yeah, one of the most important events in the decline and fall of the USSR was August coup of 1991, which saw its vice president attempt to overthrow its president, Mikhail Gorbachev. It didn't go too well and was hastily planned, but the fact that it ended peacefully is really is frankly nothing sort of a miraculous. It ended peacefully, all right? Yeah, so let's watch it. Remember, flag my Nixon. Do like, subscribe, so I know which type of videos to react to more, which type of channels to react to more. Comment if you want to react to a specific video from this channel or any other, right? I guess that way I'll know what to react to next rather than going through the most popular video. But yeah.
As 1991 was reaching its end, the Soviet Union, the world's second superpower, was in the process of catastrophic political collapse. This outcome had been fairly apparent for over a year now, and the Soviet president Mikhail Gorbachev had tried numerous policies to preserve the USSR. These included widespread reforms, notably Glasnost, which opened up the press, allowing for criticism of the government, and Perestroika, which reformed the internal operations of the USSR, notably by instigating economic reforms which allowed private enterprise and foreign investment, something which upset many hardline communists. Whilst the collapse of communism there was by late 1990 seen as mostly inevitable, the collapse of the state itself wasn't so certain. In early 1991, as part of Gorbachev's democratic reforms, there was a referendum on whether or not the USSR should be preserved, which was approved by over 3/4 of the people from these areas. The other areas had, to use a technical historical term, noped out and didn't take part. Now, when I say that people voted to preserve the USSR, I don't mean the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but a new state, the Union of Soviet Sovereign Republics, which, as the name suggests, didn't have to be communist. Furthermore, a new post was created within the USSR, the president of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, and in July, Boris Yeltsin was elected to that post, something which upset many hardline communists. And so, some high-ranking members of the Communist Party, including Vice President Gennady Yanayev and head of the KGB Vladimir
Yeah, okay. Obviously, many times people have said this, like, whenever there's a decline of anything, it's not a, it's a slow slope. It's not direct hill or something, right? It's a slow slope. So I can understand why people are pissed off hardline communist, because this was the slow slope. First of all, Gorbachev basically using lots of non-communist approach to things. That was already the first major sign. Then slowly, basically it start to water down from there, like what it is to be communist or whatever. So obviously people were probably with hardline communists were panicking at that point.
Kryuchkov decided to intervene. In August of 1991, while Gorbachev was on holiday in Crimea, the plotters leapt into action and placed him under house arrest. He was asked to resign, but he promptly told them no, and so they told the country he was seriously ill and unable to lead. And in response to this, the plotters created the State Committee on the Emergency Situation, led by Yanayev as acting president, which would run the country in the meantime. The Soviet coup had formally begun. The coup began with tanks rolling into Moscow and politicians who were seen as a threat being quickly arrested, with one notable exception, Boris Yeltsin. The committee quickly shut down all critical newspapers and broadcasted what they were going to do. They were going to...
Yeah, I guess 6 months ago I would have told you, like, oh, look at that. Can you even imagine in this today's world, tanks like that and, all that? But yeah, now I can't, right? Now I'm like, yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Fix the economy, restore the Communist Party to its rightful place, take back control of the parts of the country that wanted to break away, and finally win the Cold War. Sounds lovely, yet despite this rhetoric, the people running the country didn't have any plans on how to do this except for stop the reforms. This new leadership was incredibly worrying to the wider Soviet citizenry, and was especially so to the press and anyone who had criticized communism recently, since there was an expectation that...
I don't want to pause too much, but that's kind of the trend even today in lots of countries. Sometimes certain parties basically don't have something to give to the people, right? Are not standing for something, but their only approach is to oppose something. They are against something. They are not standing for something. That's a massive problem, right? I mean, the certain parties who basically just want to make sure that other parties' life is hell. That's it. trying to oppose everything the other party is representing rather than standing for something themselves. So once they do come in power, they're like, okay, now what?
Leaders would begin a purge once they'd cemented their position, an expectation that wasn't entirely without merit since most of the KGB were on board. Also, the coup had some support from the military, including the defense minister Dmitry Yazov, hence the tanks on the streets. Not all of the military was supportive though, notably the higher-ups in the Air Force were opposed and there was a severe rift across the armed forces. Military support for the coup didn't stop Soviet citizens from protesting against the change in leadership, and Yeltsin was a notable critic who became a central opponent who called for Gorbachev's restoration. He was also supported by a sizable part of the Soviet army who together with some civilians formed a barricade outside the White House. Not that one. In Lithuania, which had declared independence the year before, Soviet troops were still stationed there and a committee planned for its reintegration into the USSR. Across the USSR, widespread protests and strikes broke out as many politicians, both communist and not, opposed the committee's actions. Furthermore, Western leaders condemned the coup and halted all...
Okay, why is this like this? Sideways? What is this?
...communist and not opposed the committee's actions. Furthermore, Western leaders condemned the coup and halted all cooperation with the USSR. Within the Soviet Union, the individual republics were split down these lines, and the committee wasn't without some support internationally. Communist states like Cuba, North Korea and China were supportive of the coup, since they felt that Yunayev and his colleagues were right and they had no interest whatsoever in losing the primary defender of global communism. Things started to heat up as demonstrations became more incensed and there were some isolated incidents of violence. This was also the point where some in the committee realised that they weren't going to be successful. The day was also rounded out by Estonia unilaterally declaring independence, which probably wasn't what the coup leaders were hoping for. Overnight, there was some fighting between soldiers on the side of the committee and those who had sided with Yeltsin's troops withstanding the assault. It was at this point that the rest of the committee realised that they had failed, and some of them subsequently fled Moscow. Yunayev opted to face his fate in Moscow, whereas the rest, barring one because, well, went to see Gorbachev in Crimea in order to hopefully not get purged once he was back in charge. The members of the military which had sided with the committee then switched allegiance and pulled all military forces out of Moscow. The Supreme Soviet, the Soviet Parliament, then announced that the crisis was over and that Gorbachev was restored as president. The coup was over. The remaining committee members were quickly rounded up and arrested, and order was restored to the streets of Moscow. There were several reasons for the coup's failure. The first was Gorbachev's refusal to resign, which robbed Yunayev of any legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Another was that the military wasn't entirely on board and
yeah, basically, I don't know if there's equivalent saying, but in English only there is a saying here, right? Only way a bad guy or bad element to win is good element to do nothing. So Gorbachev saying, no, I'm not going to resign is kind of resistance you need, right? Because if you make a pathway easier for them, that's it, you're done. Because you're already underpowered at that point, right? Coup is happening against you. But yeah, first of all, this whole thing, right? I mean, when there is a, I guess, slow slope of communism dying, USSR dying, you have to be really clever and smart about it, like how you're going to preserve it rather than strong arming it, right? Like I'm going to just make sure the Gorbachev resigns, and top of all that, I'm just going to put tanks in the city and just going to take over. That's not going to work, because now you're just showing the entire region, all the countries inside the USSR, like what's happening, right? It's like, pushing the springs down. It's going to, come back with double force now. So that's what happened with all the countries saying we are independent, we're independent. That's not what the communists wanted. So it actually backfired there.
Politicians like Yeltsin kicked up a fuss. Yet the biggest reason that the coup failed was the people who took to the streets and stared down armed soldiers to prevent a return to the politics of old. Gorbachev's changes were popular, and the coup's leaders assumed that taking control of the party meant that they could stop them. Yet, where they miscalculated was that the party was no longer able to override the people and their support for the changes. The coup effectively doomed the Soviet Union and the Communist Party there, and the USSR itself would only last for another 4 months. The leaders of the committee were imprisoned, and Yeltsin...
I mean, this was the last nail in the coffin, right? Otherwise, it would have been a slow process to get rid of USSR. But this just like people like, oh, fuck that now, right? And even Gorbachev can basically go ahead with certain plans that before he would have thought like, maybe people will not like this, right? I should slowly approach this. And now he's just like, after all this, now I can just go ahead with this kind of plans, right? Which is going to be anti-communist plans at that point.
Would go on to become Russia's first president. The last-ditch attempt to preserve the Soviet system was a failure, and the fact that it didn't spiral into a wider revolutionary conflict is honestly quite amazing. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my patrons.
Well, it could have been, right? If the people who tried to do the coup approached it with more subtlety there, right? Took the approach with more cleverness other than just basically point blank force, right? Because with the force, I mean, you're just showing everybody the mirror, right? At that point, people are going to resent you, whatever. So yeah, if they had gone through with a bit clever plan, maybe it would have been a major scale revolution, right? We would have had USSR breaking down in the late 90s or something, rather than having in the early 90s. But yeah, well, that was the last ditch attempt to save the USSR, August 1991 by the channel History Matters. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.